Well, good evening. My name is Phil Schomber. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg, and I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker, Laura Diehl. Laura and her husband Dave lost their oldest daughter, Rebecca, in 2011, and since then they've been devoted full-time to helping parents find healing after the loss of a child. And Laura speaks nationally at grief conferences. She's a contributor, a contributing writer at a number of different grief organizations, and she's written several books, including When Tragedy Strikes, Rebuilding Your Life with Hope and Healing After the Death of Your Child. And if you don't have a copy, you'll have a chance to be able to purchase one after the program tonight, and Laura will happily sign a copy for you. And the book recounts her journey through the darkness after losing Rebecca, and tonight she's going to share some of her experience and some of what she's learned. So without further ado, would you please welcome Laura Diehl.
Thank you very much. And I do want to start out by saying thank you to Hedberg Public Library for allowing me this opportunity to share, and JATV, because they are recording this and they're going to be playing it. And so I just want to tell them thank you, because we really want this message of hope to get out, because there is hope. And when you're caught in that darkness, it's very hard to see that. And so that's I feel like that's like my calling in life, is to bring hope to grieving parents who have found themselves in that kind of a darkness that we just don't expect to happen. So I'm going to start out, and I'm just going to quickly share my story with you. This is our daughter, Becca. When she was 3 years old, she was diagnosed with cancer. She went through 9 months of chemotherapy, and she had her little left leg amputated. This is her actual first prosthetic leg that she had. It actually already has some spacers in it, because as she would grow, they'd have to add some length to it, and then about a year later she'd get a whole new leg. So this is her first leg, and it's interesting that one of those weird things that you just tuck away as a parent. But one thing I just want to say right now, that one of the reasons I travel with this leg is because it's such a good illustration of what it's like to lose a child or a grandchild. It's like a very part of you has been cut off of you. And it's like part of you has been amputated. And you have to learn how to live with that piece of you missing. And it's very different. You know, Becca, as an amputee, as a 3-year-old and growing up without a leg, things were very different for her. But she did go on to live a very normal life. And she ran. Her running was different than the other kids. She couldn't keep up, but she did run. She'd swim. She'd have to take her leg off, hop on one leg into the pool, hop back, put her leg on. Things in our house were quite unusual. We'd hear it like, Becca, get your leg out of the living room. Things like that. All of our kids, at one point, they would see the leg laying around, and when they were little, they would try to put it on themselves, because their big sister did that, and trying to figure out how she wore it. She was the oldest. We have 5 children. And so that was when she was 3. What happened years down the road is that we discovered, we were told that one of the drugs, the chemo drugs they used for children at that time, they discovered caused heart damage, one of the long-term effects. So she was tested, and she did have moderate heart damage at that time. And so they started monitoring it. When she got married, she got pregnant right away, and the pregnancy escalated the heart issues, because pregnancy, the heart has to work really hard. And so she ended up in the hospital, and she was given a 50-50 chance of surviving the labor and delivery. They just didn't know what was going to happen. They ended up taking the baby early because they didn't think her heart was going to last much longer. And probably what's considered now a good-sized preemie, but our granddaughter was 4 pounds 1 ounce when she was born, and she's a very healthy 16-year-old now. But Becca did live through that. We were blessed to have both our daughter and our granddaughter stay with us here on earth. But her heart never went back to what was normal for her. And so the last 10 years, it was in and out of the hospitals, and the last 18 months, she needed to be put on the heart transplant list. Her heart had gotten to the point where they needed her to have a heart transplant. She wasn't healthy enough even to be put on the list at that point. And so they gave her a VAD, a ventricular assist device, a heart pump. They opened her up, put in a pump that ran the left side of her heart. And so for the next year, we had like a dozen ambulance rides. The last 18 months of her life, she had 3 medical helicopter rides. She was here in Janesville, and so they'd take her up to University Hospital anytime there was an issue. And so that last 18 months was just up and down like crazy. And when she was in for her was a routine hospital visit. She needed Lasix, diuretics, because she would hold on to a lot of water weight. With only having one leg, she wasn't very mobile, especially once the heart issues really kicked in. How do you lose weight and be healthy when you can't really move around? And so her heart would, she'd collect all this water weight, and so she'd have to go in the hospital, get it all off. And so she was in what was for a routine water overload for her. And on October 12, 2011, her heart just finally gave out. And she left this earth, and we believe she went to go be with the Lord. We do have a belief in God. We do have a faith in through our Christian faith and our walk. And so I will refer to that. I refer to it in my book, and I will talk about it here because that's my experience, that's our life, that's our walk. And for me, that has a big piece of what has had to do with getting me out of the darkness and back into a place of hope and light and life again. When our child dies, a part of us dies along with our child. And yet somehow we have to find a way to live again, especially those of us who have other children. There are people who miss us. There are people who love us. There are people who need us. And even people that we've never met that we're going to meet further on in our life, in this journey, are people that are going to need us because of what we have been through, and we can help them through it. But the question is, how do I do that? Because I'm not me anymore. Like I said, it's like having an amputation. A part of you has been cut off. And so how do you get there again? Because it is impossible to be the person that I used to be. Everything is now before and after. That's just how our life is defined now. I had discovered when this happened, I didn't know anyone who'd lost a child. We didn't know of any grief support groups for bereaved parents in this area. And it was just such a dark place. It was like I didn't even know that kind of darkness even existed. And so it ended up that people started coming to us. We started hearing about other people who had lost a child, and they would be sent our way. And it was like, I don't know how to help you. I'm just floundering myself, but let's just walk this out together, is really what happened. And so things just kind of started growing organically. They just started happening. All of a sudden, I found myself writing. And I've always loved to write since I was a child. But this book just started pouring out of me. And there's a story in itself. This is When Tragedy Strikes, actually is published by Morgan James Publishing, a New York publishing company, and that just literally fell in my lap. I met the owner of Morgan James Publishing, and he asked me to send him what I had, and next thing I knew I had a contract for this book. And so once I started writing, it was almost like this dam broke, and I ended up, I look back and I don't know how I did it, but I ended up writing 7 books in like 13 months. They just started gushing from me. And within that also, and people coming to us, and then people, it was like, well, can you like I was introduced, we started speaking at bereaved parents organizations and things like that. When we had people asking us, can you start a group here in Janesville? People were driving to Madison and other places. So when we started having a group in our home, it was like, okay, well, what are we going to call it? And so just came with this name, GPS Hope. Grieving Parents Sharing Hope. And so that actually just began to grow into, we are now a national outreach. My husband and I travel full-time now for reaching out to grieving parents and anyone who's faced a deep tragedy. We're more than happy to bring a word of encouragement, because a lot of times you feel like, oh, that's just got to be the worst of the worst to lose your child. And I guess I can say, yeah, I do believe it is. It became, my husband and I sold our home and bought a motorhome, and we now live in that full time, and we travel. So we have given our lives to helping other parents, especially who are struggling with this. So as I was going through this and this new experience and this new place I found myself in, and I started writing, and I realized there's no word for a parent who's lost a child. And I thought, we all know what a widow or a widower is, we know what an orphan is, and it's like there's no words that can be put to the pain that we feel. You can't put words to how deep this pain is. But it was like, why isn't there a word that unites us in what we're experiencing and what we're living through for the rest of the time here on this earth? So I started looking at words and kind of playing around with things, and I discovered that the word bereave, the root word is the word reeve. And that word means a robbing, a seizing, being torn, something taken from you. And I thought that's exactly how I felt when Becca died, that she had been torn away from me. I was robbed of my daughter for the rest of the time here on earth. And so I ended up making a word that people have been starting to use. And if it resonates with you, we actually have bracelets that say Reaver, and if it doesn't resonate with you, I'm not offended. But a bereaver is a parent who's been bereaved of their child. And so that's just a word that I feel like can connect us in who we are now for the rest of the time here on this earth. Now, I discovered as I was writing this book, When Tragedy Strikes, that rebuilding my life was a lot like rebuilding a house that had been totally destroyed. And so that's really the basis of the book that we're going to go through in the rest of the time that we have here together. And I believe that the very first thing we have to do is lay the foundation of forgiveness. If we don't do that, we are rebuilding our lives on sinking sand. Because we can feel like we're doing fine down the road, and then that anger and that bitterness from unforgiveness will just bring us crashing down. Our lives are going to come crashing down around us again. And when you have lost a child or any deep loss, there are so many people you have to forgive. You might have to forgive someone who was directly or indirectly involved with the death of your child. For me personally, someone that I struggled with for a while, and I can let myself go there if I want to. I try not to, but there was a doctor, because Becca was so overweight because of her issues. They looked at doing one of those bariatric type surgeries, and I went with her to that appointment, and the doctor said, well, I could lock you up in a room here in the hospital and give you nothing but bread and water, and you could lose weight. And I realized looking back that she quit eating. She wouldn't even drink her protein shakes at the hospital. Well, the heart is a muscle. It's got to have protein. It's got to have nutrition. And it wasn't much longer after that she passed. And so, like I said, that's somebody that for me, I have to forgive for this indirect, what I feel like was a result of my daughter's passing. We can, a lot of times we need to forgive other people who aren't grieving the same way we are. Spouses or somebody close to us, we feel like you must not have loved them the way I did. Or they'll say hurtful things to us, ignorant things to us in our grief. And we may have to forgive people for that, for not understanding the depth of our pain. We may need to forgive our child for leaving us, as crazy as that sounds. Because we can be angry at our child because they left and they weren't supposed to leave ahead of us. And so, and also depending on if it was somehow self-inflicted. Then there's that, as crazy as it sounds, you may feel like you need to forgive your child for what they did to themselves, whether it was intentional or unintentional. God, there's a big one for a lot of people. The need, God, you could have stopped this, why didn't you? Because we pray for protection over our children, many of us, and we don't understand why God didn't answer that prayer this one time. Why didn't he answer it? Maybe we've seen him answer it for us. We saw him answer that prayer for Becca over and over and over again. Why not this time, God? Why didn't you answer this prayer? And so a lot of times our faith is shattered if we have a belief in God, and we have to figure out, God, who are you? I thought I knew you. I thought I had faith. And so we have to struggle with that. I like to liken forgiveness into a story about an elephant that I discovered in this journey. A big elephant if you've ever been to a circus or maybe even seen them on TV, you'll see them a lot of times, they're like, they've got a rope and they might be tied to like a stake, a tent stake or something, and you're like, that's kind of scary. Couldn't that elephant just like pull that up and trample everybody? Why does that, what's going on here? Well, what I discovered is that when the elephant is a baby, they'll wrap a chain around the leg of that baby elephant, and that baby elephant will try for weeks and months to get away. And they'll wrap that around something that baby elephant can't get away from. So after the elephant tries for months, that baby elephant will get to a point where he'll give up. He'll quit trying to get away. And once that baby elephant stops trying to get free, that trainer or that owner can tie anything to around that leg of that elephant, and that elephant believes he cannot get free. And I feel like that's how we are sometimes in our forgiveness, in our anger, in our bitterness, especially something as difficult and tragic as the death of a child or a grandchild or a sibling. That we feel like, but I can't forgive that person. And the thing is, the bottom line is, it is a choice. It's not based on feeling. It's a choice. And it's not for the other person, it's for yourself. You need to set yourself free. Forgiveness is for yourself. It's a gift we need to give ourselves, that we have to unwrap and give ourselves, because we will stay chained to that person that we refuse to forgive. And why would we want to stay chained to somebody like that emotionally, right? So I just really feel like forgiveness is a huge, huge issue in the death of a child or any kind of a deep tragedy. There's a lot to that. And so it's something that we really need to, I encourage people to really dig into that and really make the choice to forgive those people that you need to forgive within that tragedy or that death. In the book, there's a whole chapter on this. And on our website, we actually have a free library. And I believe that there's a lot of power in our words. And a lot of times we can think something, but when we say it, all of a sudden it becomes more real. Or we hear someone else say something, and all of a sudden it just makes sense. There's power in our words when we speak things out. And so I encourage parents and people to speak out forgiveness. And a lot of times they don't know what to say. And so I actually, in the book and also on our website, it goes even deeper into some prayers. I actually wrote out prayers or things that the words of forgiveness that you can speak, and you can put that person's name in. And they're all based on, do you need to forgive your child or yourself? Oh, there's a big one, yourself. You can torment yourself with the what ifs and I should have and all the things. That's a big one, is forgiving yourself for what you feel like you missed or you should have or could have done differently. So I encourage you, if this is an area that is just really something speaking to you, then go to our website. There's a free library. All you have to do is give yourself a password, log in, and you can access those prayers and a lot of things on there. And we'll give you that at the end of the talk here. So the garage of tears. A lot of times, if you found yourself sitting in a garage and you're not quite ready to go in the house yet, maybe you're listening to a song on the radio, maybe you're just really deep in thought about something, you're not ready to go into the chaos or whatever it is, okay? You end up sitting in the garage for a while. And I liken that to our tears and our grief triggers, sitting in the garage of tears. It's okay. We need to lean into our grief, because grief is a process. Death is the event. Grief is a process. And especially when you've lost a child, it is a lifelong process. And so there are going to be grief triggers for the rest of our lives. Things that are just, it's going to be painful, and we're going to cry, and it's going to be difficult. And it's okay to lean into those times. Lean into that grief, because the only way is through it. There is no way around it. There is no shortcut to grief. You have to go through it. And so it's okay to sit in the garage of tears when those grief waves come. For me, I'm one, Becca is buried at Oak Hill, and I would go to the cemetery a lot, and I would look at pictures a lot and cry while I'm doing all these things. And other people, like my husband, women were just a lot more emotional. It's just a known fact. As a whole, men want to protect their wives and their family, and they grieve differently. And so this isn't like hard and fast, but generally this is true in a lot of cases. And so for me, in order to process my grief, I had to surround myself with things that made me think about Becca. As much as it hurt for me, that was part of my grieving process. In order to really realize this was real, it really happened, I have to figure out how I'm going to live, how I'm going to keep going. For other people, it's a distraction. All those kinds of things are a distraction in their grief. And so we have to be okay with however we need to grieve, be okay with that. And if that means a lot of tears and a lot of crying and a lot of pulling back, people aren't going to understand. People are not going to understand why I can't go to that baby shower, why I can't go to that graduation, why I can't go to that wedding, why I can't go to that family reunion. It's been 4 years. You should be over it by now. You don't get over it. And it's okay if you find yourself sitting in that place, the garage of tears. The family room of a support system. A lot of us have a great support system when our child dies, but the more time that goes by, the less support we have. And like I said, we'll start hearing people saying, oh, you should be over this by now. I actually had someone very close to me that shocked me that said, they said, you really need to put that behind you and start moving forward. Sorry, not happening. You can't put your child behind you. It's just not happening. Whether they're here on earth or not, you're not putting them behind you. It's just not happening. So one of the best things you can do, I encourage, especially if you face the death of a child, a grandchild, somebody close to you, is get plugged into a support group. And one thing that we have found is that if you're a bereaver, you've lost a child, the parent of a bereaved child, a lot of times the generic grief support groups, they're helpful in some areas, but processing the grief of the death of a child is such a different grief that sometimes it just doesn't work to be in a generic support group. For instance, if it's a generic group and maybe someone brings up, it's been a couple of years, I'm kind of feeling like I might want to date again. I'm not sure, and they're trying to figure that out. It's like, that's sure not my problem. I can't relate to that at all. And so we'll find that as a grieving parent, to try to find a support group, there are Facebook groups, but you gotta find places and people that will give you hope. There are so many that stay in that darkness, and that's one reason why we started doing what we're doing, is because it was so hard to find parents that wouldn't say, oh, you're always going to be a mess, it's always going to be dark, it's always going to be horrible. And it's like, I refuse to believe that. I was not going to live the rest of my life in a shell of a person waiting to die. I had children, grandchildren, a husband. I knew I had people and things to live for, and somehow I had to find my way out of this. And so I fought for it, and it's worth the fight. But one of the things I was afraid, if I connected with other grieving parents, like going to a conference, we actually host retreats and conferences and things like that. I thought if I met with a group of bereaved parents or spent a day with them, it was like I felt like I was such a mess. The last thing I wanted to do was go hang around with a bunch of people who were a mess like me, and I was going to leave feeling worse than when I went. And what I discovered is how wonderful and healing it was to be around a bunch of people who were a mess like me. It was exactly the opposite. It was very healing, and it was wonderful because I didn't have to put on a mask. I didn't have to walk on eggshells, because we find that we find ourselves responsible to make the people around us feel comfortable with our grief. It's crazy, but that's what we do. And then we go home and we fall apart. We use all of our energy up on making everybody else feel better about our child being gone, or our grandchild, or our sibling, and then we go home and fall apart. We have no energy left for anything else. And so what I discovered is being with other bereaved parents was actually wonderful. All the masks went. If you wanted to cry, you didn't have to explain yourself. If you wanted to laugh, you didn't have to feel guilty for laughing. We were all there because we all had lost a child. And so we really, really strongly recommend that if you have lost a child, plug into a grief support group that will meet your needs for your grief. The bedroom of rest. Just like someone with an amputation or a major surgery takes a long time to recover, it takes a long time to recover when you've had your child amputated from you, or somebody very close to you. And so it's okay to have downtime. Not only is it okay, but you need it. And a lot of times, just like when you've had surgery and you're starting to feel better, and so you think, oh, I can do this now, I'm better, and boy, you find yourself, you just threw yourself back in bed for another 2 weeks or whatever. It's the same thing with grief. You can start feeling like, I think I've got this, I think I'm doing okay. And then you start doing things, and all of a sudden you just crash, and it's like, why am I crashing? Because you're in grief. And you need to allow yourself time to rest. You need to allow yourself time to just have that downtime and do nothing. Do nothing. I remember one time I was sitting in a specific chair in my living room, and I realized I'm not breathing. I had to tell myself to take a breath. That's how deep the pain was. So give yourself time to heal. And when I talk about healing, I'm not talking about you're going to be better. I'm talking about healing, getting to a place where you can have hope again. You can have life again, and light in your light, and you can live with purpose and meaning again. It is possible. It is possible to get to that point. But you have to allow yourself, and like I said, other people aren't going to understand it. Because I think we can all think of things that have happened in our lives that unless you have been through it, you just don't get it. And so it's the same thing with the death of a child. People around us are not going to understand why we have to pull back and why we have to rest and why we have to make time for ourselves like that. We're not going to be able to, hey, come on out. We're going somewhere. Come out. You'll feel a lot better. No, I got to rest. I got to step back and rest. And come on, you haven't been out for months. It's okay. It's okay. You got to take care of you. You have to take care of you. One thing that I have learned is that peace and pain can live inside of us at the same time. See, as a Christian, as a believer, I was kind of raised, well, I guess all my adult life, it's like, oh, I got to have the victory. If I'm a Christian, I got to be on top of everything, and I got to have the victory, and I can't get down on things, and boy, I got to pump myself up and read my Bible and go to church and do all the right stuff. And what I've discovered is it's okay for pain and peace to be in me at the same time. And that's going to happen. And the reason is because pain is in our soul. Our emotions, our will, we're feeling the pain of the loss. But my spirit can feel the peace. And so I can have peace and pain at the same time. I used to think that was a conflict. If I had pain, I wasn't doing something right. But now I know that they can be in me at the same time. The personal care room is extremely important, but I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But it is really important physically. There are physical changes that happen when you go through grief. Literally, I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and I'm talking about it. I'll just dig into it just a little bit. Our immune system is compromised. The chemicals change in our brain. Literally, you remember a few years ago when Carrie Fisher died and Debbie Reynolds died like 2 days later? Literally, you can have a broken heart. The right side pumps differently than the left side. All kinds of physical changes happen when you're going through deep grief. And so take care of yourself. Take care of yourself physically. Try to eat right. Try to get out there and walk. Try to do those things as much as you can. And take care of yourself, because there are physical changes that happen to us in our grief. We do have on our website, right on the front page, if you're interested, we can send you a PDF. It's 30 ways to take care of yourself. 30 suggestions of little things you can do to take care of yourself. So if you're interested in that, just go to our website. It's gpshope.org. Very simple. The kitchen of usefulness. Now, after I talked about how important it is to rest and to take care of yourself and to step back and all that stuff, there is something to be said about being useful and finding ways to help others within the grief. And I don't mean to force yourself to do that, but if a little something comes your way and you can help somebody, a lot of times it helps us. There's a strength that comes when we can help other people. Now, we have to find the balance to that, because way too often I have personally met, and I actually have a friend that I'm really concerned about right now, that they jump in so fast into doing something big or going right back to what they used to do, or if anyone's doing this, please hear me. I'm not in judgment. I'm not condemning. I'm not saying you're wrong or anything. I'm just saying be careful, okay? Because we can jump in immediately because we want to keep our child alive. We want their legacy to continue. We don't want people to forget about them. And so we'll start a big fundraiser or a big walk or a big, a lot of it is based on how they died. And so we'll start, suicide awareness, and we'll start a big fund for that or whatever it is. And we get so involved in that, we crash. I have known personally multiple grieving parents who have done that. And we're so numb, and we're on autopilot. I traveled internationally. I did international children's ministry in many nations for a good 10 years before Becca died. And I was still doing that as a children's pastor. And I took a trip to Africa. I mean, I'd been there before, and I knew a lot of the people that I was going, but I was on autopilot. I mean, I look back now, and I don't know how I did it. I was on autopilot. And when I came back, I paid a really heavy price. My adrenal glands went nuts. My organs started shutting down. So I had to just pull back from everything for months. And it still plagues me once in a while if I just try to do too much. I used to be that Energizer bunny. I used to thrive on busyness and doing all kinds of things. And that's not me anymore. Not me anymore. I have to, I'm a different person now. Things that I used to love being around, and I hate to say it, my grandkids, I always look for the time that I would just be surrounded by grandkids. And I can't handle that much chaos like I always wanted to. So we're different people. And so you have to be careful within that usefulness within that needing to be needed and needing to help others and needing to keep your child's legacy alive. Just be really careful that you don't overdo it, that you're not on autopilot, so that, because what we've seen happen is that they'll start these things and then like 2-3 years down the road, it quits, it falls apart because they really didn't take time to work through the grief, and they were so focused on this project that they were doing now that they really didn't allow themselves to grieve. And so 3, 6, 10, 15 years down the road, I have a friend who called me and said, I don't get it, I'm falling apart now. And I knew exactly why she was falling apart. So just really, if you pray about that balance. And just be really, really careful about that.
One more.
I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. There's the kitchen of usefulness. So the other thing I just want to say real quick is that find purpose and meaning in a way that keeps you from being stuck in the place that my child died, but my child lived. That's what we want. We want to remember that my child lived. And so that's one of those things. So looking out the window of fear. Fear can become huge after the death of a child. One of the books that I have is a coloring book. I have a really good friend of mine that hand drew all the illustrations. And it's like 42 words that have to do with grief, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's got some journaling in it, some coloring in it, and I write a few things to think about with that word. But I color in my own book, and the first page that I colored was the word fear. And what I wrote in that journaling prompt, I think it says my greatest fear, or the thing I fear now, or something along that line. And I had to write in that I'll lose another child. Because once it happens to you, something you think will never happen to you, and it happens. And now you know it can happen again, because it happened to you once. It can happen to you more than once. And especially with me, now I know a lot of people. There's actually an organization called Alive Alone, for parents who either lost their only child or who have lost all of their children. So that, the fears can just begin to take over your life. So many parents, it's like they won't let their kids out of their sight. They have this fear that they are going to lose another child, and so those kinds of fears can just take over. Some fear, if you're a Christian, or maybe you don't know what you believe spiritually or about the afterlife, and they fear they're never going to see their child again. And especially if you are a Christian, you may feel like, I don't know if my children received the Lord. I don't know if they were baptized. I don't know if they, went through, accepted the Lord, or whatever they needed to do to get into heaven. And that is a horribly tormenting fear for a lot of parents. And so what I share with parents when I discover that they're fearing this is that you don't know. You don't have all the information. And I believe God's love for our children is even greater than our own love for our children. And I believe that He did everything possible for our children to have an entrance into heaven, into eternity. And it might have even happened that split second that child died, that they had an opportunity to receive and accept an entrance into heaven as a Christian, through Jesus. So the thing is, you can either choose to walk in fear, or you can choose to walk in faith. And they're both come from the same place, because think about it, they're both your belief of the unknown. So I'm either going to fear what I don't know about the future or about where my child is, or I can have faith in the unknown of the future and where my child is. And I highly recommend that you choose the faith side, because like I said, we don't have all the information. We don't know what was in the heart of our child. We don't know if there was some time before that where they took that step and God received them. We just don't have the information. So don't allow yourself to be tormented by that fear. One thing, people who maybe have a belief in God, or maybe people who don't have a belief in God, this is why. Because we feel like if God was so good, I should be able to say what I want. I should be able to pray. I should be able to, why does a good God let bad things happen? That kind of a thought. If He was really good, if He was really out there, he wouldn't let these things happen. But that's really kind of like treating Him like a genie in a lamp. We rub it, we say the right things, we do the right things, we go to church, we do what we're told to do, and God will give us a good life. And that's just like, we think God's going to pop out and say, your wish is my command. What do you want me to do? Well, then He's not big enough to be my God. If I can have Him answer everything I want the way I want it answered, then He's not big enough to be my God, because that makes me over Him. And so I've gotten to the place where I just have to trust He sees what I don't see. He knows what I don't know. And I have to trust Him that He sees the big picture that I don't see. And this isn't it. For me, this isn't it. This isn't the end. This is the beginning of where I'm going. And so that's how I see that about looking out the window of fear. That we don't have to walk in fear. We don't have to live out the rest of our lives in fear, because fear brings torment. And so choose to walk in faith that this is not it, and there's more, and that God is taking care of all of that, even when we can't see it. A spiritual fireside chat, I have a chapter in there. I talk a little bit more about some of the things that God, I have a relationship with God. I'll take time to hear, I'll ask Him what He thinks about things, and I'll take time and listen to what I'm hearing Him saying, and I journal, and so the spiritual fireside chat is a lot of the things that I believe God spoke to me in the depths of my darkness in getting me through this. Sitting on the porch of your identity. I guess I didn't say this, but our children are a part of our identity. It's a part of who we are. Our siblings are part of our identity of who we are. And so we have to work through that. Because it's like, who am I now that I'm not Beccas' mom? I mean, I'm still the mom of my other kids. I'm still a grandma. But with that, it just rattles you, because your identity is wrapped up in being a mom or being a dad. And so who am I now that child's not gone? Especially if you have lost like your only child. Am I still a parent? Yes, you are. Just because your child isn't here doesn't mean you're not a parent. Things like, how many children do I have now? Simple things you don't even think about. When someone says, how many kids do you have? I mean, that's like one of the first questions you ask, right? When you get to know somebody, how many kids do you have? 5. I have 5. One time I said I have 4 and I will never do that again. It just felt horrible and wrong. I have 5 children. And so we have to work through the identity of who we are without our child, but we can do it. The pillar of thoughts and words. What we believe and what we think are so important. See, our beliefs drive our thoughts, and our thoughts drive our emotions, and our emotions drive our words and our actions. So it all goes back to what we believe and what we think. And so our perspective is so important, especially with the death of our child. Something that specifically when I felt like I can't live, I can't get through this, I don't know how I'm going to live the rest of my life with one of my children gone. And that's one of those things that unless you've been there, it just doesn't make sense. And I'll tell you right now, a common thing of siblings is, and it happened to me, which stunned me. I had my other daughter come to me one time and say that she thought, because she saw how deeply I was grieving Beccas' death, her sister's death, she came to me and she told me that she thought that I thought the wrong one died, that I lost the wrong daughter. So as parents, we do have to be careful how we grieve, because that's how some of the siblings will interpret that. They think that's what they think. So we have to be really careful about that. So when I was in that really, really dark place, those first year, 2 years, I mean, it's a long time. Anything 5 and under is considered fresh grief for a parent who's lost a child. That's important to know. And it's considered traumatic grief. And depending on the circumstances around it, most parents will have PTSD. And there's just a lot behind that. So give yourself grace if you've lost a child. And if you feel like I should be beyond, further than this, you probably shouldn't. You're probably right on schedule, because 5 years and under is considered fresh grief. So when I was in the really darkest part, I was at the cemetery, and this is something that was a change for me in my perspective that helped me turn one of my first corners that I know that I turned. I used to spend a lot of time at the cemetery, and sometimes I would just walk around, look at other tombstones, and I would see 40-year-olds, I would see 16-year-olds, I would see some that were 20s, 30s, and they all had families, right? They all had lost someone very deep to them, close to them, a deep loss. And I remember specifically standing in that cemetery at Beccas' grave and looking out at all the other tombstones and thinking every single one of those tombstones represented a deep loss to somebody. And somehow they got through it. And if they can get through it, somehow I can get through this. And that was a change in my thoughts, in my beliefs. So the perspective and how you think about things. Here's another one. I would panic to the point where I could hardly breathe when I started thinking about 1 year without Becca, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I can't even fathom 10 years down the road being away from Becca. 10 years she's been gone. And it would almost like these panicky anxiety. I couldn't breathe. I mean, I would just, and one time, I believe it was the Lord that spoke to my heart and said, you're not getting, because it was like I'm getting further and further away from her. And I believe it was God that spoke to my heart and said, you're not getting further away from her. Every day you're here, you're getting one day closer to her, to seeing her again. See, so there's another one of those changes in my thoughts and my beliefs. The perspective and your thoughts and your beliefs have a lot to do with helping you on this journey and getting to that place of being in hope and light and purpose and meaning again with your life. So it's really important, like I said, it's very important to connect with other people who have experienced the loss that you have experienced, that will walk with you with the hope that they have. Because sometimes when we're in that darkness, we can't see it. It's easy for people around us. Have you ever known someone who is in a really dark place and you can see, it's like, I don't get it. They're still in this dark place and you can see everything around them and the hope and the good. But when you're in that dark place, you can't see it. And so find people around you who have been where you are, that are further down the road, that will walk with you. And let them be your hope and let them be your light until you do have your own hope and your own light. So we need to connect. We need to connect with other people because they will help us in the perspective of how we see things and how we think about things in the depth of our loss. The cornerstone of trust. This is where the question why, I feel like, comes in. It's very hard not to ask why, and it's not very many parents who don't ask why. When we hit something really hard, really deep, really dark, it's easy for us to ask why. Why me? Why my child? Why? The thing is, we don't usually get an answer to that. And even if we did get an answer, would it be good enough? I can't imagine that if God would have said, this is why, Laura, I would have said, oh, okay. I'm okay with that. It's kind of like a teenager that wants the keys to the car and we tell them no and they want to know why. They don't want to know why because they want to know the answer. They want to know why so they can argue the answer. Right? And I feel like that's a lot of times the way we are with our whys. It's not that we really want to know the answer because the answer isn't going to be good enough in our pain. We're asking why so that we can argue about the answer, why that answer isn't good enough. Because this hurts too much. That's not a good enough reason. So I suggest we quit asking the why question and start asking how. How can I get through this? How am I going to get to the other side of this? How am I going to see light again? How am I going to want to even live again? How am I going to do this? God, how are you going to get me through this? Those are the kinds of questions that will start getting answered in your life. Not the whys, but the hows. How am I going to get through the other side of this in one piece? How? So I really recommend that you turn that corner. And part of the reason is you can't trust someone if you feel like they have wronged you. And we have a hard time trusting God if we feel like he has wronged us by taking our child from us. And the thing is, God is not the author of death. God didn't create death. In fact, he has the opposite. His specialty is life. And so he made a way that this isn't permanent. Death is just a step into the next world. And it's really hard to see that when we're in the middle of this mess and the pain. But we have to get to the point where it's kind of like, I felt it was kind of like with, if you're familiar with the Bible, and Jacob, and there was an angel that he wrestled with, and Jacob said, I am not going to let you go until you bless me. And that's kind of how I felt. It was like, I'm not letting go until there's something good that comes out of this. I refuse to let this be wasted. I refuse. Something good has got to come from this. And so we have to get to that point where we can begin to trust that there is good beyond this. There is good beyond this, and God's goodness beyond this. Putting on the roof of hope, I'm going to ask everyone to take one of these. Go ahead and grab one. Grab one and turn it around and pass it behind you there. Now, I think we all know what this is. It's a glow bracelet, right? Is it doing what it's supposed to do right now? No. It's not doing anything. This is kind of worthless this way. The only way this little gold bracelet is going to have its worth is if I break it. Go ahead and break your gold bracelet. The only way it's going to shine and it's going to do what it was made to do is to be broken. And I believe that a lot of times in our lives, it's through the brokenness that our lives will eventually, we can start to shine. And we can start to have a purpose in our lives that we didn't even know was in us to have. But that doesn't happen until we're broken. That we can really begin to shine with that purpose that we're here on earth for. I look at now what Dave and I are doing and traveling for grieving parents. And I look at how much of my entire life I feel like God was lining things up. Things in my life, I can look back now and I can think, wow, I would be totally lost in knowing what to do here if I hadn't have done that back there, and I didn't have this in my past, and I didn't have this, and I wasn't here, and all that stuff. So be encouraged. Being broken does not mean you no longer have value. Being broken does not mean your life is now over. It may just be beginning in a new way that you never even thought was in you or thought was possible. And that is hope. The swimming pool of joy, all I'm going to say is that it is possible to splash around in the swimming pool of joy once again in your life. It may look different. That's another thing. Joy is totally different to me now than what I thought it used to be. But I do splash around in that swimming pool of joy now. The support beam of grace. This is actually Dave's, my husband's, thing here. He actually wrote this chapter in the book, The Support Beam of Grace. It is so important to give grace to the people around you that are grieving differently, that don't understand us, those kinds of things. It's very, very important. And I'm very thankful that I have a husband. Not all marriages are like that, or surrounded with people that knew how to give me grace to grieve the way I needed to grieve, even though he didn't understand it. And I hope I did a good job of giving him grace, at least sometimes, and not grieving the same way I was. But that is so important. Out in the driveway, where do I go from here? Working through our grief is a lot of hard work. It is hard to work through grief. And it is not betraying your child to purposely go forward with your life. That's one of our fears. I feel like I'm betraying my child if I move forward and start living again. But it's not. In fact, I want to suggest that it may actually be dishonoring your child by not moving forward, because we want our children to live on. We want their legacy to live on. We want them to be remembered. So if you choose to stay stuck in that dark place, and at the beginning it's not a choice, we are in a dark place, but we do get to a point where we find ourselves starting to choose staying in that darkness, and we may make the choice to start stepping out, and then we find ourselves for weeks back in that darkness again. Nope, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not doing anything, I'm staying right here. But it's not betraying your child to choose to go forward without them and to live a fulfilled life, even though they're not here. One of the things that I suggest is writing your child a letter. Tell them how you feel. Tell them what you're going through. Tell them your struggles. Tell them how much you miss them, how much you love them, and then get rid of it. Let yourself really feel and say what you need to feel and say. And then go ahead and destroy that, so that you can, even if you have to say, I'm sorry, but I feel like I have to figure out how to live without you. Go ahead and say that if that's what you need to say, and give yourself permission to do that. Bad things happen to good people. Horrible and evil things even happen to people who believe in God. The question is, are we going to let the death of our child be wasted in our lives? Are we going to become bitter, or are we going to become better? What value are you going to place on the life of your child? And that's where the mind shift happens. Life or death? We get to choose for ourselves. Am I going to live, or am I going to die on the inside and not live out the rest of my life while I'm here? See, Becca not only died, she had life. She had 29 years of life here on this earth. And maybe your child didn't have 29 years of life. Maybe she only had 16, or maybe he only had 6 or 7. Maybe your child didn't even have life outside the womb, but they still had life. And because I had the blessing and honor of giving Becca life, I choose to live to honor that life. I refuse to let death cause more death, There is strength for the weary. There is hope for the hopeless. And I encourage you to let that seed of hope that is in you, there is a seed of hope in you. So I encourage you to allow that to continue to grow until you do have meaning and purpose in your life again, not in spite of your child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. So if you are a bereaved parent, I just want to tell you how you can connect to us. Our website is gpshope.org. We have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. And we started a podcast, and the very first topic, I've spent the first 8 weeks talking about forgiveness, each group or people that we have to forgive. I just go into a lot of depth because I do feel like that's very important. If you are not a bereaved parent, but you would like to connect with us, you want to know where we are in our travels and hear about some of the people that we're talking to and helping and how they're being helped, we do have, you can also connect with us on our website. Also, we have a Friends of GPS Hope Facebook page that you can be a part of, and we share things there that we don't share in other places. We have, like I said, we live in a motorhome, and we have these hearts that we put on our motorhome. Anyone can sponsor a heart. It doesn't have to be a child that you've lost. And they'll go with us wherever we go across the nation. And so it's $100 if you want to sponsor in loving memory of the person that you have lost. And we're just very honored and blessed to be able to take them with us everywhere we go. So I really want to say thank you again for coming and listening and allowing me to share. And I just want to end by saying to remember, hold on, pain eases. There is hope. Thank you.